I'm Fred McClimans of HfS Research, and in this edition of the Cyberchat, we're talking with Bill Phelps of Accenture. Bill is one of my co-collaborators in the recently launched report, The State of Cybersecurity and Digital Trust in 2016. Bill, welcome to the Cyberchat.
Thanks, Fred.
So Bill, we spent several months going through surveying security professionals on a global scale, different verticals, different geographies, different size organizations, to really uncover what the state of cybersecurity and digital trust is today. What were your expectations looking at this when we first started, and what surprised you coming out of the report?
So Fred, I was really excited about doing this report together because we were taking a new perspective, looking at security through the lens of digital trust, not purely as a technical or operational issue. And I think a lot of the findings reflect that. I think honestly, one of the most amazing things to me was that over a third of our respondents said over a third of their management doesn't see the value in the money they spend on security. And they're disengaged. So in spite of security being a front page headline item almost every day of the week, we still have leadership in organizations that don't make it a priority, and that was mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise to me as well. I would have expected a little bit more closer alignment between security operations and executive management in these organizations.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the best CISOs I know spend the majority of their time with their business counterparts. And that typically creates good alignment. But there are still a lot of what I think of as the old school CISOs, very technical, very capable individuals who often came up through a technical track. They haven't learned to engage with their business counterparts. And so the business counterparts naturally don't necessarily appreciate the value of the security organization and how it can team with them.
I think one of the elements that might be fueling that a bit is the shift that we're seeing away from cybersecurity as a way to protect assets and more of a way to develop assets that can be leveraged to create a greater feeling of digital trust for the enterprise and its consumers.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that people have viewed security as a very tactical discipline. We have to authenticate users. We have to prevent data breaches. Instead of a element of an organization's brand and thinking about a consumer saying, this company I'm doing business with takes my privacy seriously. When we're talking right now to CISOs, especially for global organizations, privacy is coming up and up and up in the agenda. Trust is coming up in the agenda. And it's, in my opinion, becoming more and more about the brand and about how organizations convey to their customers how seriously they take privacy, they take trust around the digital identity.
Well, looking at trust for a moment, one of the things that came out of the report that was a bit surprising to me was the number of organizations that acknowledged they have had insider data theft over the prior 12 months. And in fact, they expect that to increase in some instances moving forward for the next 12 to 18 months.
The reality is that the easiest person to steal information inadvertently, intentionally, is an insider. They have the credentials. Perhaps more importantly, they understand the value of the information. They have access to it. And I do believe that we're going to continue to see more of that until organizations not only have the right controls in place, but have the right value system in place and can convey to their leaders and to their employees the importance and sensitivity of the information to the customers.
Well, I think that insider threat is a particularly challenging one. As you mentioned, they've got the credentials, they know the system, and they know the value of the data. I think there are a couple of things that are potentially shaping that. And by the way, personally, I think of insiders as falling into a couple of different categories. You've got the person who actually has malicious intent to damage the company or to steal something from the company. But then you also have sort of the innocent insider, the person that's falling victim, to a phishing scheme or a spear phishing scheme. They think they're doing the right thing when in reality they're being manipulated, and that's a tough thing to spot there. So one of the things that was encouraging in the report was while firewalls and encryption, those technologies are still core to cybersecurity. Moving forward, a lot of the CISOs that we interviewed, they see a lot more reliance moving ahead for things like automation, analytics, behavioral analytics in particular, and cognitive, shifting into AI moving forward. And I think that's going to be required to really monitor how individuals are behaving within an organization, and even perhaps how data is flowing throughout an organization to kind of spot that.
I mean, I think that there's two things going on in how we see organizations evolving from a security posture standpoint. One is exactly what you said. It's better analytics around user behavior, around where information is flowing, so that we can quickly spot anomalies and patterns. The second thing is what I call a rebirth or a resurgence of the importance of identity management, and organizations that are realizing that so many of the breaches are the result of a misuse of an identity. In some cases, it's by a malicious insider. Some cases, it's by an insider who, as you said, has been tricked. Some places, sometimes, many times, it's a stolen identity. Mm-hmm. It's an identity that's been acquired maliciously and is being used. And all of those can be addressed through better analytics, but they need to fundamentally also be addressed through better management of those identities. And we're seeing a huge uptick in interest in that.
Yeah, I think from an identity management perspective, there's also sort of the possibility to overlay on top of that behavioral analytics, as well as kind of blending a bit of digital and physical security. Right person, right credentials, wrong location, or wrong time of day. Something that's out of the norm from their typical behavior.
I mean, an interesting, I'll call it macro level finding in the report was the immaturity of organizational governance, reporting lines, who the CISO is working with. And one of the places that manifests is in the link between physical security and information security, logical security. So many organizations, those are completely different cultures, reporting lines, accountability, budgets, and yet you're totally right. If we bring them together, we can answer these questions around why is somebody accessing the financial system in New York at 1 a.m. in the morning?
Right.
Shouldn't it raise a question? That we don't understand. We can't understand simply through the information security systems, but as soon as we overlay the physical systems, it's an instantaneous, obvious question.
Right. Now, you mentioned reporting structures, and one of the surprises that, at least to me, that came out of the report was when you look at the existing reporting lines, cybersecurity professionals reporting up to the CEO, the chief risk officer, the chief information officer, pretty much across the board, there was dissatisfaction with who they were reporting to. Everybody, in fact, in some categories, it was, I think, 100% of the individuals that report to a chief risk officer want to report to somebody else. And to me, that was a bit of a surprise. Maybe it's because the chief risk officer is still, in many cases, very much focused on corporate governance and not really addressing some of the larger business issues in play.
I think, first off, it's an indication of the immaturity of this area. We don't know what the right answers are in many ways in information security. Mm-hmm. We are working through it, and we know some things that don't work. But in terms of reporting lines, I can say that roughly half of CISOs report to a CIO. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's a very good and positive relationship. Sometimes it's not. And one of the reasons it's not is they have conflicting motivations. The CISO's job is to protect the organization, first and foremost. The CIO's job is to deliver business functionality and business outcomes. Well, if the CIO is under a great deal of budgetary pressure and time pressure, and the CISO is saying, you need to slow down and spend more money on the security of the code that's being delivered, the security architecture, you have a conflict. And sometimes that's been rationalized, other times it hasn't. And I can give you similar examples with CISOs reporting to CEOs, CISOs reporting to COOs, CISOs reporting to CROs, as you were talking about. I think that the autonomy of the CISO is critical, and their access to senior level executives across the organization, but we don't have a one-size-fits-all in the organizational alignment yet.
So in the report, we identified 5 gaps that are having a significant impact on the ability of CISOs to actually execute on their role within an organization. I'd like to kind of walk through those and just get your take on each of those.
Sounds great.
The first gap is the talent gap, the requirement on the part of CISOs to fully staff, not just a number of bodies, but the skill set of bodies against their available talent pool, out there in the market. So, what's your take on that?
I think of the 5 gaps we're going to talk about, I would put that maybe as second in importance. Mm-hmm. It's clear from the findings of this research and from all of my discussions in the industry that absent talented security professionals, almost nothing else matters. We can't configure the tools properly. We can't communicate effectively to the business. And these are people that in many cases, it takes time to develop.
Right.
It's not putting them through a brief certification program. It's education plus, on-the-job training, apprenticeship with professionals. We are not satisfying the demand for talent quickly enough, and it's one of the topics that comes up in every single discussion around security with my business clients.
Right. One of the ways that I think some organizations are starting to address that talent gap there is through automation. Looking to take as much of that level 1 burden as they can and shift that away from the individual and let them pretty essentially just bump up to a level 2 in functionality. And I think that's a good step, but it also, I think, is going to have sort of a negative impact, because that means that the entry-level position into the cybersecurity talent pool is now level 2, not level 1.
That's right.
And that requires just a complete rethinking of that educational process.
I think that's true. I think the automation is a huge buzzword in IT right now, the robotic process automation. It's really valuable for automating, as you said, a lot of the tasks that are easier to teach people to do. And that's an entry point for security professionals, but the toughest jobs to fill in security are those of seasoned individuals who know how to spot the telltale behaviors, who know how to respond to the problem or issue they haven't seen before. So you need those people to train human labor, you need those people to train the robotics, the analytics systems. So while I think there is a benefit to the process automation, I'm not sure how much it's going to help create the very talented senior level security professionals, and as you pointed out, it may even be a hindrance.
Right. So the second gap that we identified coming out of the research was around technology. And there are a couple of ways that we saw this manifested, one of which is the challenge on the technology side in terms of just keeping pace with the technology that's available out there. I mean, there's a continual upgrade process, there's a continual budget item that we'll talk about in a moment here that comes with that. And there's also sort of an interesting issue of how technology plays a role for the enterprise as well as for the threat actor out there. I mean, very often they know the same basic technologies. Unfortunately, though, I think the enterprise is fundamentally at a disadvantage because they don't know the threat, as completely as perhaps the threat knows the enterprise.
The threat actors have very good talent. They're not necessarily using expensive, commercial software, but what they use that's available open source or available in the darknet, they know extremely well. They are highly professional actors as adversaries. The technology that's being used to defend the organization, many times off the shelf, many times highly sophisticated and capable, it doesn't have the people who understand how to use it as well. It is evolving very rapidly as the newest, brightest, shiniest object, is funded by the VCs or comes out as a feature from a large vendor. I think what our research says and what I found is that to really make it simple, the problem in technology is that what we have we're not using well, not that we don't have the latest technology.
Well, I think the end result is pretty much across the board, cybersecurity is an asymmetric battle today.
It is totally an asymmetric battle. Yeah. And there is, I don't think there's an end in sight. I'd love to sit here and tell you that, that 2 to 3 years from now, the defenders are going to catch up. We're going to reach a parity where it's a little bit more of a stepping stone the way we see in a competitive environment. There are so many vulnerabilities in the environment. The attackers have a real advantage in their collaboration, their understanding of the technology. These are things that we'd like to see in the defenders.
Right.
But to some of the organizational issues we've talked about, there's a lot of catching up to do.
So the third gap that we uncovered was what we're calling the parity gap. The differences between capabilities that exist within an extended enterprise. And to kind of give an example of that, we asked the CISOs responding to the report to rank how secure they thought various business elements were.
Yes.
The sales organization, not that secure. IT very secure, but sales not that secure. Customer support kind of in between there.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's an incredible risk because the amount of data that's shared, collectively throughout an enterprise, and then with partners that may be in different regions, different vertical sectors, you're only as strong as your weakest cyber link.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
This is one of the top challenges I see in my clients is we sit down with a CISO or we sit down with a chief risk officer and they explain how much they've invested in security in IT or how much they've invested in security education. And I say, well, do you know all the organizations in your supply chain? Or you recently acquired a company, have you assessed their security? And it completely comes down to this weakest link problem. And it comes down to the fact that with computers and with automation, it's not hard to find that weak link.
Right.
We think about so-called security by obscurity, but when the adversaries are running scanners against the environment, they can very quickly go through all every single IP address. The idea that you can protect part of the organization really well is completely inadequate. And so many of the major breaches that we've seen have been the result exactly of that, of compromising some obscure part of the ecosystem and using it as an entry point into the broader enterprise. It's a huge problem.
Yeah. So let's take a moment and talk about budgets. I mean, budgets and funding, that was the fourth gap that we identified. And it's a very important one because it impacts all the other areas. When we asked CISOs, what were the inhibitors to complete enterprise cybersecurity and digital trust? One of the top inhibitors, lack of budget for either technology or I think more importantly for staffing and training in there. I mean, that's a huge issue. How can enterprises kind of reframe the discussion to kind of fix that budget gap?
We touched on this a little bit, but my bias in this is that it's the security professionals not doing an adequate job of educating the business that is at the root of the funding issue and the budget issue. I have heard business executives, boards, and others all say a variation of we're willing to spend the money. We have the money, we're willing to spend it. We need to understand where the money's being spent and the value that's being created. And the security organizations are struggling. I'm not saying this is easy, but they're struggling to answer those questions. What are we getting for the money? Are we better this year than we were last year? where is the right place to spend the money to get the greatest benefit? It seems too much like a bright, shiny object. We need the new object. We need the new tool. We need the new technology. I do think also that this issue of educating on the importance of spending on talent and on staff, but basically it's educating the business executives on how the money is being spent and how it's making things better. Is there is a cynicism that the money is not actually improving the problem.
That leads nicely into the fifth and final gap, the management gap. When we asked CISOs how they viewed management's position on cybersecurity, we saw a third of respondents indicate that they believed management's opinion was that it's an unnecessary cost. And to me, that was really a surprise. And I've got to think that part of that comes down to the issue of expectations and really, as you pointed out, understanding what is the role of cybersecurity and kind of extending off that or extending that a bit, the issue of not treating cybersecurity as a fixed feature cost, but really building cybersecurity into that holistic business model, making sure that you're creating an architecture for your products, for your services, for your customer support, for your sales that has cybersecurity baked into it. And at that point, hopefully you can start to recognize, here's what we're spending, here's the necessary cost in order to create a trusted ecosystem where all partners have trust in the data, in our ability, in our response, our transparency, and then we can get to a better level of outcome as a result. And I just don't see organizations there today across the board.
We're still seeing cybersecurity in too many organizations as a discrete function, not as a value system and part of the brand in the organization that is broadly embedded. I spend time across many different industries. I use an example from the energy industry. The energy industry has embedded employee safety as a fundamental value. And so if you go to most oil exploration production companies and go to a meeting, the first thing they'll talk about is they'll do a safety minute or they'll do something. If you go to one of those organizations and you get a visitor badge, you have to sign something that says you understand their safety policy. We're so far from that in cybersecurity. So many organizations, the business, if you say, what are you doing, Mr. Vice President of Sales, for security, you get a dumb stare and they say, well, that's the job of the CISO.
Right.
We have a long way to go. So, I think I said this, but the most successful organizations, the CISO has become a peer of the business executives, both in substance and in style. They spend a great deal of their time with the business. There is top-down support for making security part of the culture, part of the brand, and that's where we're going. And this is where I think is the most important of the 5 gaps that we identified, is how much we need to get on this journey of taking security from being a function within the organization to a value of the organization.
Right. I think there's a culture of cybersecurity, or perhaps better framed, a culture of digital trust.
Yes.
That has to come from executive leadership. That has to be baked into every aspect of the organization. And if you can get management engaged, and involved in understanding the value of the outcome by having digital trust in the organization, I think organizations or enterprises will be, much further ahead.
I mean, it's translating it to what does it mean for their customers. We were talking earlier about how many times we've gotten credit cards replaced this year. It's transcending being a transactional cost of the business to replace the credit card, and it's becoming a detractor to the brand. I don't want to deal with a company that keeps letting my credit card be compromised, so I'm going to switch to another bank or another credit card company that doesn't cause me to lose trust in them. And whether it's the safety of cars, whether it's the protection of my medical records and information, I'm looking at this as a brand attribute, not a transactional issue.
In fact, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the findings coming out of the report talked about or took a look at the impact areas, that could be damaged, or areas that could be damaged within an enterprise after a cyber attack.
Yeah.
And two of the top areas, customer support and brand trust.
Yes.
And that, I think, says it all right there. That's the critical item. That's why we're involved in cybersecurity, is to make sure that the customer is properly taken care of.
That's right. Yeah.
So let me ask you, one of the discussions that we've had ongoing throughout this, the development of the report, centers around state of the art, or the term state of the art. That used to mean best technology, the leading edge, everything, my stereo was state of the art at some point, my car was state of the art, my laptop was state of the art. But the reality today is that changes so rapidly. What's happening to state of the art? How should we view state of the art cybersecurity?
It's a great question, and I think it's an evolving question. So traditionally, what do we look at? We take ISA, we take NIST, we take the PCI framework, we do a capability assessment, we rate a company in each of the different areas, we look at the technology they have, we look at the processes we have, and we say, great, you are a mature company from a cybersecurity standpoint. And then they get breached. Over and over and over again. And I would not say that it's the fault of the framework or the architecture. We said, if business and security aren't aligned, there is no way that you're going to have a secure organization. If the business is saying, that security requirement, that's slowing us down. There's got to be a way that we can circumvent that to move faster.
Right. You never want security to be an inhibitor of business.
You never want security to be an inhibitor.
Yeah.
So to me, almost going back to our gaps, security maturity and state of the art starts with the alignment of the security function to the business. It starts with how security is perceived as enabling the business, enabling trust amongst the customers, the suppliers, and the others within the organization. It is, do we have enough of the sufficiently talented security people in our organization, and are they respected by the business? And then, of course, it comes down to specific capabilities and technology and things like that. But those are almost an outcome, not a starting point for me when I really think about what state of the art looks like.
From Accenture's perspective, when you looked at the report, at the raw data, we sat down, we went through hundreds of slides, hundreds of data points in there. Looking at that information in total, how has this, affirmed your position on digital trust, or shaped, the way you view digital trust and cybersecurity moving forward?
Fred, I think it was tremendously validating for some of the direction that we were already taking, and I think in some ways may accelerate that. What I mean by that is we are moving very much from thinking about security as a technical issue that gets to capability, as we were talking about it, a few minutes ago, to talking about it as a brand attribute, as something that is communicated to customers, and that's a business value. So what does that mean in our business? It means we're selling to business executives. It means we're engaging with the broad business leadership in a security and dialogue. It means we're talking about digital trust, not just talking about security. It means we're saying, what do you want your customers to think about you in terms of whether or not they trust you, whether or not they are confident in your protection of their private sensitive information, whether it's medical records or financial information or whatever. So I think it's accelerating our move from security as a technical discipline to security as a broad business attribute.
Right. I think if your cybersecurity or your approach to cybersecurity doesn't reinforce the brand promise and your ability to deliver on that, you're probably wasting your time.
You certainly are thinking it's not valuable and that it's a cost, not an investment. You know, as soon as you start thinking about it as a brand attribute, it becomes an investment.
Right. So, Bill, I can't thank you enough for being part of today's Cyberchat, and look forward to following up again a few months down the road. We'll see how this market is playing out.
That's great, Fred. Thank you very much. I think this was some very exciting research.
I'm Fred McClimans of HfS Research, and this has been an HfS Cyberchat.